And Dr. Miller will tell you to put the bone back. Watch what doctors tell us.
Yeah.
If there's injuries below the knees, if you got a messed up ankle, you're putting that thing on the ankle, or you're not, and then pulling against the ankle. You got to make sure you have your anchor and your pulley good and solid. The one we have that's about this long, you can actually, once again, you put it like right here below the knee, and you can pull traction there even though you have foot injuries. And it will pull traction on the femur, which is pretty cool. But the femur is the only one you're going to traction. Remember to check SMC. Skill drill number 33-1 shows you all the flexing and what you're checking. Make sure they have sensation on all sides and parts of the foot. And then you're going to reassess every 15 minutes if they're unstable. 15 if they're stable, 5 if they're not. Recheck all those SMCs. Keep checking, make sure they're still there. Make sure your toes aren't turning blue because your splint's on too tight. Or fingers. That's why when you put a splint, you need to be sure you can see toes and you need to be sure you can see fingers. What? Oh yeah, that's true. We're talking. Well, I guess that's technically musculoskeletal. Cold packs are good for the first 48 hours after an injury. So you can apply cold packs. The table 33.3 talks about how much blood you can lose through a fracture. So a pelvic fracture can lose up to 3 liters of blood in your pelvic fracture. This is why this splint, the pelvic binder, is such a cool thing, because it brings it back into shape and helps stop that bleeding. Femurs can lose 1.5 liters, which is why we're pulling traction on them, trying to reduce the pain that that big muscle is causing. And it also hopefully can help with the bleeding too. Splinting. Normally, what are we splinting? If it's a long bone, what are you splinting? When you have broken bones? Joint above, joint below. They both have to be immobilized. If it's a joint, bone above and bones below if you have more. Be sure this, yeah. That's which is why arms are handy, because you can just tie them to the body and you have it. If you have somebody with massive fractures and you don't really have time to splint it all, that's where the backboard is handy. You put them on the board, you strap them down, put blankets on the sides or whatever to make sure they're not moving, and you've splinted everything all at once. You can buddy tape things. It works on legs too. You can tie legs together. Pelvic fractures, it kind of helps some of them feel better if you tie their legs together. But they just tie the thighs. Sam sling. Pelvic sling. Sam splint is a little rolled up thing, and
I like those.
The sling is the one that goes around here, and you just have somebody hang on and you feel it clicks. Let go, strap it down. Do you? Cool. Tighten it on. Cool. Okay, so here's there's pictures there of how to put the Sager on and how to put the hair on. I find it I'm surprised if anybody's still using a hair splint. That's what we used to use. It's got 33-3 is the hair. And when you push that up, you would tie something around their foot and you would pull traction and carefully lift the leg and you'd shove that thing up underneath their leg. And you had to be sure you had it tight against the ischial tuberosity, because if you did not, when you started pulling traction, it's just going to slide up their back. Or when you move it, if it's not firmly in where it belongs, it will flop loose and you lose traction. So people always hated the hair. Worked great when you put it on right. A wrist splint being used by the military. Looks like the hair. That's curious.
Is the Zoom link always the same?
Oh,
I found it.
It's sent to you.
Oh, yeah. I think
splinting. We have all kinds of wonderful splints on our outfits. There used to be something called a pneumatic anti-shock garment, or a PASG. That if somebody had injuries below the pelvis, you put them on. They're like a pair of pant type things. You stuffed them up underneath them, and then you strap them across the legs. And then there's a section that closes across the abdomen. And then you could pump them up like a big, gigantic blood pressure cuff. So the idea was you would pump the legs up to make their blood pressure come up, because you're pumping the blood out of the legs and putting it up in the core. And if that didn't work, then you inflated the abdomen area, and it was supposed to keep your blood pressure up and be a wonderful thing. It really was not that wonderful. And I'm honestly surprised it's still in the books, because do you guys have one on board? No. Most services do not carry them because it can complicate anybody who has pulmonary edema, pregnancy, heart failure, penetrating chest injuries, major head injuries, groin injuries. Pretty much you were complicating, making things worse instead of better. What ours was used for 20 years, it made a really nice seat if you were the only one in the back and you were bored, and you could sit on it while you talked to the people up front. And I finally realized that was all it was being used for, and I took it off the ambulance. We no longer have it. Vacuum splints are wonderful because you can form it around anything. I don't know if you guys have played with them, but you can form it around your arm in the weird shape, and you just use the little pump and you pump all the air out like you can in the lots. And it has little beads in it that just form around you. You would?
I said I used it on the last call.
Cool.
For you. Like,
it sucks up around the arm, and it doesn't feel like you have anything on, like it's done anything. But if you try to move your arm, yes, if you really forcefully, you can get it out, but it really doesn't. It's a lot of protection and not doing for no pressure. It's just kind of there. There are air splints, on the other hand. Some do both. You can pump it up and put pressure on it. The problem with putting the air into the splint, if somebody is going up in a helicopter, or if you're on the mountain and coming down, or if you have to drive them over a pass to get them to definitive care, your pressure is going to change when you start messing with altitude. So you need to keep that in mind and keep an eye on it. Your pelvic binders on the bottom, figure 3328. Is probably the SAM, the one very close to it. We had the ones that went with the lots for years. We never could figure the dumb thing out, and it was a whole lot harder to use than that. Okay, any questions on musculoskeletal? You need to be aware of what nerves and blood vessels might be being affected. What is compartment syndrome?
Inflammation inside the muscle.
Okay, the
The
muscle
fascia.
is squeezing out. Muscles have just a small area. They have the fascia around it. What's not called fascia? What's it called? Is it? Fascia, the whitish stuff that holds it in place.
yeah.
So as you start getting bleeding out in there, or if you smash it and swelling's going on, it starts squeezing and it can damage your tissue. And make things go necrotic, which means it's starting to die. You have a real pretty crush injury on 3329. I'm glad I didn't have this book when I took EMT class. My 3-year-old studied the book all the time, looking at the pictures. Yeah. Okay, what's another worry we need to worry about then besides compartment syndrome? Rhabdomyolysis is, what is that? Anybody know?
Right.
When things start bursting and breaking down, yeah. Yeah, another thing you need to worry about is as clots are starting to form, as these things are trying to heal, they can break loose. And what's the problem with clots?
Rhabdo.
Okay,
She's moved on. I have it.
haven't what?
Oh, God. I got, like, it can't, isn't rhabdo, like, can't it be internal too? Like, can't it affect your internal organs, like, if you overwork or something, overworked out? When I was applying for a gym, they like warned me that if I like, yeah, there's like a whole sheet like from each side. I don't remember exactly a little time.
Probably happened once and they had to worry about it forever after because.
And I watched the episode of the show and she overexerted herself. Really, like, I mean, like, overdid it for like days and months, like overdoing it, like, I mean, like really.
Till things finally wore out.
Yeah.
Broke.
That's all.
Okay. What you will more like often see are embolisms, clots that either go to the lungs or go to the heart. You have your deep vein thrombosis. Sometimes people just have that. It's a disease. My brother had that, and he used to get clots in his legs all the time. Case of the nephew that had that piece, his first rib taken out. He had big thrombosis all through his vein. I mean, it was like a huge one that went about down almost the full length of his arm when they got it pulled out. But what we need to be aware of with any bone fracture or any of these things is be watching for signs of sudden respiratory troubles, sudden chest pain. Be aware you can have an embolism moving around in them.
And what sign did they say? Like if they're having difficulty, if it's the left?
I think it's left side.
Left, yeah. Yeah.
Then the book goes through. You can look at 3333 has a really neat. The clavicle has come loose from the joint, so it's sticking up. Broken clavicles usually you can see major deformity in them. They're either sticking out or going down or up or whatever. You get your shoulder dislocations. The book will show you different ways to take care of things. Shoulder dislocations, the one place I've seen a lot of are rodeos. You're hanging on to this animal that's trying to rip you loose with one arm, and that just rips those arms.
Off the back end.
Yeah, they come up and say, please put it back. Are we trained to put that back? No, we're not. At the last PRCA rodeo in Thermopolis, we got called into the chutes for a bull rider at the very end of the rodeo who had a dislocated shoulder. Thankfully, Dr. Bohm happened to be around. And they called him and said, get over here. And he put it back in for us. But while they were messing with this person, the other person that were in the chute itself, because he came off, they let the bull out, came off right as the gate opened. So they went ahead, pulled him out of the way, let the bull out, shoved him back in and closed it to keep him safe from the bull. So there's like 5 of us in this chute. One was a buddy. Well, 2, I guess, were rodeo people, then us 2, and then the injured guy. And the buddy, as they start messing with his shoulder, passes out on us. Not only passed out, but went into full-blown seizure. So one EMT, I'm here trying to take care of this guy, other EMT is trying to, okay, he's going down, you guys screwed over, so we're all real smashed out of there. And it turned into quite the adventure. But we don't put that back. You splint it, get them to somebody who can help them. If they can turn it in, you can put the sling on, but if it's something weird, you're gonna have to get hard splints, sticks, boards, whatever you can find to try to put that into place. Remember that you have a lot of blood vessels and nerves going through there, and try not to damage any of them. Another very common fracture is pictured on page 4, picture 3341.
That's on 3348. That's the interesting small shaft. You have that picture?
33 what?
3338.
Yep. I've got it strapped to the body and padded on the outside to help relieve pressure on it.
And then the padded board spline.
We just got given padded board splints. We don't carry those anymore. But the cool thing about them, see how on it's probably your next page, where they're going across the corner of the elbow.
Yeah, I've seen that.
You can do that with knees too. If they're bent and you can't, it's, I don't know what, 3340. You can take 2 padded boards and put one on top and one on the other across the bend here, making the 3rd leg of a triangle, and just tie it down really good. And that will hold that joint in place. That wasn't where I was going. Picture 3341. You see those guys a lot. That's what happens when people fall and they put their hands out and they break both their tib and their, not tib, radius and ulna. And it just kind of lifts this up. Yeah, that way. Fractures of the pelvis. There's a really pretty x-ray right there that obviously isn't what it's supposed to look like from somebody who fell. We had someone after a rodeo when the wind came up. Usually at the end of the 4th of July rodeo, you have a thunderstorm coming in. And it picked up their tent, and this dear soul tried to keep it down. Dear soul wasn't big enough to make a difference and got picked up in the air with the tent that got blown away. Finally came loose and fell about 30 feet to the road below, the dirt road. And she had a real pretty thing that looked something like that. Amazingly enough, she is walking today and looks almost normal. Took a long time to get there though. That one, if you don't have a fancy pelvic binder splint, what can you use? You can use a sheet. Put it up right where you feel that hip bone. Right there is where these things go. You don't go up high, you don't go down low to the femurs, you go right where you feel the greater trochanter. That's what's holding it in place and helps put things back. In her case, we did a sheet wrap. We went from here and on down. I kind of put it from here to here. You wrap it around, it cradles everything back in, twist it really tight and tape it down. Yes, we did.
Love it.
And when they were getting ready to transfer her to Billings, Billings said, "Do you have a sling on there?" And he said, "I don't think I dare put a sling on this." Because it didn't have enough to hold that form. It was already totally crushed. And if you'd have put that on, it probably would have just mashed that side in further, displacing it.
Yeah.
So yes, we made the right call on that one.
That's my
If it's totally crushed, be careful using the sling. Be sure and assess tenderness. When you're checking pelvic fractures, they tell you to push down on the crest and to push in. Be very, very gentle. You're not just jamming like you are when you're checking everywhere else. Because if there's going to be movement there, you don't want to be moving it. Hips can dislocate. We talked about that kid, but it can happen from knees hitting dashboards. They're showing different kinds of fun splints. Knees, if they want to be bent, that's a good way to splint that leg. This is an anterior location, posterior dislocation of the hip.
Oh,
3347. That's what I told you that kid had.
Yeah.
They just kind of put pillows below and strapped it that way. And yeah, I would have taken the shoe off too. It has heels on it even. They splinted that with a heel on her foot. Maybe it was helping keep it off. That's an old scoop stretcher.
Oh, yeah.
That's what the old scoop stretchers look like. They were metal and evil and liked to bite and couldn't go into x-rays very well.
Yeah.
They pinched like crazy.
Have more stretches? It's still going down, right?
I do. They're radiolucent. Knees are always fun. If they're dislocated, we don't put them back. It's not our department. When I was doing my ER time, when I first became an AEMT, these people came carrying in this little girl in his arms. She's screaming in pain and her legs are flopping like this on the side of his arms. She had a dislocation that looked like picture 50. She had dislocated her knee and the kneecap was out of place. And as he's flopping that, walking in with her, I bet she was screaming like crazy because that was hurting. And the doctor felt down the leg and he says, "Oh, good, somebody put an ice pack in there." And they said, "No, we didn't." And it was actually her patella that he was feeling. Tibias are often dislocated because they don't have a whole lot of skin around them. So you get these fun open fractures, and yes, you want to control bleeding. I've had a couple of them that have been open. They've been hit by a lot of force right here in the shin, and it split the skin open there. And they weren't bleeding much, so I very carefully splinted that out and made sure you could see it, so you could see what was going on, and took them to the hospital. When you get them in a morning ambulance and they quit being shocky, that's going to bleed like crazy. Don't do that. Pack that spot, wrap it nicely, and then splint it. Because it's going to start bleeding and you need to control the bleed. When they got there to the hospital, this was not very well trained me. Oh, this was a lot of years ago. This kid graduated eons ago. But they open the splint and blood pours out the splint. So that was not a good thing. Remember tourniquets if you need to tourniquet to control bleeding. Amputations, we talked about them. Sometimes they can reattach them. Here where we're at, it's kind of not as likely. Things like fingers and toes, they don't bother with because we don't have a neurosurgeon here. This is a pillow splint on an ankle. We had somebody who had a very bad ankle fracture. Found stuff where the road didn't go over boulders. And my dear little EMT is trying to form a SAM splint and get the leg up, put that SAM underneath him. I said, just put a pillow around it. That stabilizes everything around it. So yeah, SAMs aren't always the answers. They're wonderful, don't get me wrong, but just be sure you're using the best plan. That's why there's more of us than one. So we can figure out better plans. Any questions on orthopedic trauma? Mhm. I agree. We all need to do jump ups.
Yes.
Do you want a break before we go into environmental? Yes, there's Pepsi right down the hall. Okay, I will give you 10 minutes. Be back at 10:45. 10:45, go. Now I should pause the recording.
Recording stopped.
Thank you. Don't talk. I'm going to eat myself a much food.
It works fine.
Forward.
That's the trouble when you already have existing back injuries that anything extra just, oh. And then I went and took that lead on in the powers. The button was sawmill. The firewood off there. And I was like, I'm driving around trying to find this address. And a buggy pulling with a horse pulling buggy. A couple people in it, and I'm like, okay.
Next door.
And then I'm like, there's a house with buggy parked in front, and there's another house with buggy parked in front. I'm like, oh, I just put
Hey, are you headed to Maryland?
like,
Oh, okay.
by the time the
You going to New Hope yet?
they have a whole row of buggies.
Oh, okay. How was the
It was
eating?
like, what? Yeah, lined up. There's this buggy.
Did she ask you who you were? Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I should have told you to back up to the garage. I forgot to tell you that.
Oh,
okay. Have you gone with me before? Oh, okay, perfect.
Oh, no.
All right, I love you. Bye. Ugh. Had to take dogs to New Hope 2 days in a row.
Right.
No, for cremation. This last one was horrible. Chris ran over her dog.
Who?
The vet. Oh. It was a 2-year-old beautiful German Shepherd. My dog's best friend. No.
Let's send a picture of this and the book.
Oh, I'm gonna.
Send a picture of that book. I'm missing out today.
Wait, we gotta get the ones in the background. It's so good.
See, y'all are missing out.
I'm hungry.
Hungry.
Hey Becky,
Yes, ma'am.
is there a way that you could email me a copy of the hour tracking sheet? I thought I had one left over from my B class, but my husband decided to do cleaning.
Bless their heart.
He tried really hard, but threw away some stuff I needed.
Yeah,
Becky,
I can do that. Yes, ma'am.
and now that she brought that up, I was organizing myself yesterday. So that tracking sheet is one that you can log several patients, yes, that we have contact, but there is this one too. Yes,
That one is not,
and it's very long. Are we completing that one too? Look, I'm sorry, let me do this. This one says on top, Office of Emergency Medical Services, Advanced Emergency Medical Technician, Student Clinical Evaluation. And it has a lot of questions, yes. It says
Okay.
clinical location, yeah.
that one is part of your final,
Oh, so it's no for now.
not for now.
Oh, good. Oh,
When you do the hands-on part of the final,
okay,
they used to just say, yes, 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 you did this and you passed.
okay,
Now
perfect.
they have that sheet that they can come back and say, you know, they did this, 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 but I'm not so sure they'll make a good EMT because of.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So they're looking at all of you, not just whether your skills at the time of your final.
Perfect. Thank you, Becky.
Uh-huh. There's another form I'm going to be sending you. I just scanned in this morning. I might can do it now. Let me close this down. Ah, it won't let me. There's another form I'm going to be sending you that you keep track of all your IVs, your IOs, your Kings, your combi tubes, and your patient assessments. And we're coming up on time for, have you guys in Thermop, do you all have enough ambulance runs that you have your hours and you've all done this patient assessment at least 6 times?
Yes.
All right, because it's coming up on time, we need to either get people in the ER or not. If you guys already have yours, then we won't worry about you guys. Most of them run with Cody Regional, and I'll have to see how many my crew's been on. They might be the only 2 I need to worry about. 3. Let me guess. Buck is going to be my problem.
And it's 24 hours for the requirement? Or is it more for this one?
From what I understand, the A is less the hours and more the patient contacts.
Okay.
Yeah, be keeping track of all the runs you do. Turn in. I mean, it's always better to have lots over, but I'll have to look at that when I can get to my computer screen too without shutting you off because of the recording. Okay. Hours. That's McKenna that needed a log.
Yes.
And I'll send you all the skills logs. Anything else anybody needs that I haven't done?
I'm just checking about if I need to do any retakes, Becky.
Any what?
Any retakes for the tests.
Okay. On the test, I was going to mention that. I never got the second test sheets from Thermopolis. I can't remember if I got the third ones or not. I know I had all the first test. So if you have your answer sheets, please get them sent to me. Some came by phone, some came by email, and I was going to get that organized yesterday, and I didn't get to do that because I've been taking care of my mother-in-law for most of the week.
Hey, Becky, I think you told me you had all 3 of mine.
Okay.
But
I think I have all of yours.
yes.
With McKenna and Brennan.
Okay.
I
will
know that
resend-
second test, I never did get your sheets for.
Okay. I will resend it. My phone's been weird about sending pictures, so I'll just send it through the email this time.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem.
That PGT Monster and I put it on ice because I like to eat the ice.
You know what that is? What's the heart attack? I can't
I know, I know,
have a heart attack just so you know.
I know.
I don't know it.
I have,
I drink a lot of.
Believe that I do.
I drink Red Bull.
I drink lots of Red Bull too.
There's a little man over in the one that they thought was having a stroke. And it turned out somebody brought him a thing of monster drinks of some kind
I drink like 4 of them.
and accidentally brought it to him and he drank one and said, oh, this is pretty good stuff. And he kept drinking it. And then he thought he had a major stroke.
You had a heart attack instead. Stroke. Oh, he did have a stroke. He thought he thought
No, he didn't have a stroke.
he had a heart attack. No, nothing.
No,
It was just
well,
like
the symptoms
Mimic.
were those.
last Saturday when we had class.
Once he got off it, he was fine.
Drank so much that was my interest, like eating. And I went home and I couldn't sleep because I was like literally like I needed to like run a mile to get like I was like
I need to school her. Also.
You know,
oh I learned.
every book starts with taking care of yourself. Yeah, and everyone says, get rid of alcohol, get rid of caffeine, get rid of smoking.
You would think that alcohol would
Exercise.
wash away your
Let you
feelings,
mess
but it makes you
around
cry
on
more than it should.
And then EMS runs on caffeine. It makes no sense.
You run like that.
So to
Really?
be
Yeah.
honest,
Right, Mark?
Or they wake us up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right, Mark? You run like that.
Probably me and the cool Becky would go at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
We went on like 3 calls in a row that early. Like, no joke, like,
yep, because I said,
it's like
Keep it
5
up.
calls in a
okay, guys, tonight's yours. Let's have it.
It's like 5 calls in a 4-day span. So we were just like, fine. Like, we're done.
Okay, time to get going again. What all is involved in environmental? Is it hypo? Cold. There's cold injuries and heat injuries.
Where are we? Those?
Chapter 34.
Anything water related.
Things water related, things, bites, animals, critters.
I got stuck in a trouble.
I saw pictures that they had recently people in the Bighorn Basin somewhere had a grizzly bear attack training. They put pictures online. Grizzly bear attack training. When we did the mock MCI last fall, definitely had an environmental impact on you guys.
Yes, it was awful. And I laid on the road for like 30 minutes.
I looked at my poor little victims. I had my students be victims that night. And they were sitting there going, and they thought you were faking it.
And she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, pretending to be dead. She's like, I need to know if you're actually really okay. I'm like, no, I'm dead. You guys are trying to get me.
I bled to death and I froze to death.
Shaking. And the girl was like, something's wrong.
Yeah,
I was more concerned about the.
you did. She was really hypothermia.
Be a mechanism and environmental.
Okay. So we're going to start with cold. What ways the body loses heat? Conduction, convection, radiation. So touching things. Being immersed in cold things, around cold things. Radiation, we lose heat anyway, out. That's what you guys were losing as you were laying on the cold ground. It was a very cold day. She's laying on the cold ground and there's wind going on too, so that didn't help. anytime people lay on the floor, if you go to a middle of the night call for some little old lady, well, early morning, whatever, there's a little old person that needs help up off the floor. How long have they been there? And they can be very hypothermic laying on that floor. I've told you guys, I usually tell people about our person on, it was right around the 4th of July. There was triple digit temperatures. We get called up to a campground, and there's a person who was, he was diabetic, and they were trying to hurry and cook lunch because he was going low. So they left him sitting in the chair in the sun, and when they looked at him again, he was unconscious, totally unconscious. So they thought, oops, we better get him out of the sun. And they did, thankfully, put a blanket under him, I believe, and laid him in the shade. But he did not wake up. And when the food was ready, he did not wake up. So they called us. And being diabetic, this is a story Guard tells often, because it's one of the few times I caught him. We grab him, we put him on the cot, and we throw him in the back of the ambulance, and he starts the IV, gets it going, and gives him the D50. And in watching him, I see the guy start shivering. And I remember as we picked him up to move him, I asked, because he was sopping wet, I said, has he been in the creek? And they said, no. I thought, well, okay. So he starts shivering. So I'm looking for a hat to put on him, and I'm trying to crank up the heat and find a blanket, and Guard's pushing me away saying, are you kidding? It's hot. What are you talking about? As soon as he burned through the sugar he gave him, shivering, he quit shivering again. And he needed more sugar. His sugar was low enough that he couldn't shiver anymore. So when they gave him the sugar, that just gave him energy to shiver, which indicated he was cold. His core temperature was like 91 or something. It was really low. So we get him over to Worland, and they take his temperature, and Guard came and said, you're right, we should have covered him up and put blankets on him. As I was doing the run sheet, he was helping. So cold heat things can happen at any time at any place. You can have people working inside with cold stuff. You can have people with the propane tanks. The guy got burned by it, and of course drove himself to the hospital. Cold burned, yep, frostbite. Then you have the wind chill that gets in there. There's a cool wind chill chart. And when you get down in your temperatures, Fahrenheit, you start getting even 15 degrees. With some wind, you start dropping to below zero temperatures pretty quick. So be aware of that. You also have your heat index, depending on what your humidity is, how fast you're going to get hot. So when you know you're in trouble is when somebody is cold and they are no longer shivering, and somebody is hot and they are no longer sweating. Because that's how the body compensates. And when they get to the point they can no longer compensate, you really have a major battle on your hands. Characteristics of hypothermia: shivering, foot stamping, your blood vessels start to constrict to keep it warm, and they start becoming withdrawn. This guy was totally unconscious. We couldn't wake him up. So there's a little chart there about how they progress. Both heat and cold compound on each other. If you don't fix it right away, it's going to keep getting worse. So you might start out, yeah, I feel a little cold, or gee, it's a little hot. But as you keep going, it becomes the shivering. Then you quit shivering. Your hands start getting numb and tingly. When you come across anybody that you think has frostbite, if you want to check their temperature, We don't have probes to really check an internal temperature. I don't know about the paramedics, but we don't. Take your gloved hand, pull the glove off, and put your hand on their belly, back of your hand on their belly. If that still feels cold, or put the back of your hand on their forehead if it feels hot. If you're checking for heat or cold, but your belly is more core because your forehead will depend on where you just walked in out of. You have some pictures of cold injuries on the nose and the toes. And an ear. See that beautiful little blister? Kind of look like your legs. 34.5. That's the back of an ear. Looks like your legs, exactly. Then you start getting permanent cell death and gangrene. If you look at 6, it's getting worse. Number 7, you're into frostbitten skin. It's hard and waxy looking. Do not take those and rub them. Right, you got little frost, icy, sharp things in there now. And if you start rubbing them, you're going to damage tissue. I know someone they did that to him when he was little. And it damaged the tops of his fingers. And as he grew, the bottom of his fingers are normal size and the tops are just little bitty things. They never grew anymore. They grew bigger around, but the fingers themselves quit growing. So his hands look really weird because he's got little stubby fingers. Because they'd done this when he was little.
There was a line of demarcation from about the ankle down. Your skin were starting to take it off.
Yep.
Untouched. I was like,
They will.
that
We were talking about football games in the TC. They played a game up there one year. And there was this much snow. And bless their hearts, they plowed the lines. And on the field. So every time they got tackled, they had snow packing in their uniforms. These guys were freezing to death, and the quarterback, who's standing over here on the sidelines all during when they were doing defense, he used up all of my heat packs I had, trying to keep his hands warm in between so he could go back out and play. And they said afterwards in the showers that his toes, well, they probably weren't black like that, but they said his toes were black after the game. And his mom was trying to rub him, and they were saying, no, don't rub him. Don't touch them, no. Don't touch the fingers. So yeah, the goal is to recognize this, the cold and the cold injuries, before they get to the point that they're totally frozen like that, if we can. Of course, we're called to things on the mountain that you can't necessarily. We did get called to one guy who was frozen to death. He'd been missing for like a week. And they were searching. He told his family he was going to Boyson and changed his mind and went up to West Tinsley. So they're searching around Boyson for a week trying to find this man. When they found him, then we got a call for some guy, unresponsive guy in the car up there. Because it finally hit the weekend and somebody went up. You could tell where he'd been shoveling, trying to get out. His car got stuck in the snow and he was trying to get unstuck. And they think he probably may have had a heart attack, but he was frozen solid at that point. We had a guy here that fell down his stairs and couldn't get up, and his house was heated by a wood stove and it was doing a real bad cold spell. And they say he was totally blue, stiff as could be, still alive. They warmed him up and got him going again, but he didn't last long. Had a lot of damage. So, because you can start losing things like fingers and toes and more, they have to start amputating sometimes. It's important to try to save all that you can. What do we do with somebody like that we pick up that's cold? How?
Blanket.
You do a careful assessment, you handle them pretty carefully. Warm IV fluids, warm
Heater
blankets.
on.
Is there something you want to do before the heater and the warm blankets? If clothes are wet, get them off. I often come in the winter thinking I'm really smart. Woohoo, I'm in a nice warm house and I've been walking through the snow, so my pant legs are wet. And I wrap up in a nice warm blanket and I sit there trying to warm up. And about an hour later, I realize I'm not warm. I still have wet clothes on.
Like, oh, I remember calling, we picked someone up and they were like laying in the snow. You were there, you drove us actually. And we cut all of her clothes off and then the ER was like, why did you get clothes off of her? And we're like, cause she was wet. It was New Year's Eve. We're like, cause she was soaking wet. Like
They were
we're,
wet. We could not keep her warm.
yeah, they were like, oh.
Exactly.
Like, why is she naked?
We're trying to warm
Wrapped
her
in
up.
blankets.
Yeah. They took her blankets
Um,
off. Change the clothes.
Even blankets, but you can stand there with the net yet. Where that you made it to. And other than quick thing with the wet clothes, you're supposed to be standing there with wet clothes. And yeah, but you know, if it's raining, of course, I was spraying with going on the front off.
Yeah.
High water at the top.
cold high water.
Yeah.
Anytime people are exposed to wet conditions, cold, wet conditions, if they have not dressed appropriately for the weather, that night we got called out of, well, just before EMT class, we were called up the mountain for a cross-country skier. And it ended up being a 2 to 3 hour trek back in to grab the guy and drag him out. On foot using just our little Stokes basket. And one of my dear little souls that showed up and responded and did most of the pulling had gloves that were fingerless.
No.
No, I didn't see that. I didn't notice that. But boy, did I get yelled at afterwards. If you are responding to a call on the mountain in the cold, be sure you are dressed appropriately so you can take care of them. I got kicked off the mountain once, and I had my jeans that were lined with polar fleece, and I was dressed all toasty warm, but I was not prepared for hip deep snow. If you fell through the snow, it was up to your hip, clear through. The snowmobile that was trying to take me into the scene because it was powdery and you were going up, he couldn't get all the way to it. So I had to finish getting there on my own steam. And really, if you very carefully crawled on your forearms and your knees, you did pretty good, but every so often you'd sink in. So my nice little polar fleece jeans that were to keep me dry and toasty warm got wet. And I got booted off the mountain and sent back home. Not home, but back to the toasty warm ambulance with the wife of the person. It was a cardiac arrest. He was long gone, but yep, if people are fatigued, if they have tight clothing that's restricting circulation, your layers need to be loose fitting. If there's alcohol or drug abuse involved, if there's inadequate nutrition, again, we're talking about a lot of our elderly or homeless people. Diabetics, people with cardiovascular disease, why those two?
Poor circulation.
Circulation, exactly. And age is a factor, the young and the old, particularly. Little kids don't feel the cold. Their body doesn't kick in and say, oh, hey, I'm cold. They just go out and play.
Plays in the creek anyway, and he comes inside and he's soaking wet. And I was like, take off your clothes so we can change you. He's like, no, I'm fine. I'm warm. I'm like, no, like,
You are
Take-
not.
your clothes off. We will change.
Into something warm and
Cause
dry.
it was like 7
You know, one of my favorite things about the ER is that you can go to the blanket warmer and pull those twisted little blankets out. At home, you can do the same thing with a dryer, throw things in the dryer and pull them out and wrap them up.
That's what I did this morning before work. I put my clothes in, dried them up for 5 minutes.
But you were all bundled up in.
I ain't good enough to turn my heater on yet, so I have to heat my clothes up.
Yeah, it was 31 degrees here this morning. So check those people in those categories much more carefully, thoroughly. I've got a mother-in-law that's wrapped in blankets and heating pads in the middle of the summer. That was just, come on, you have to be hot.
Like, really?
Yeah,
Really? Oh, she runs it all the time.
keep it toasted. Okay, so there's a flow sheet on figure 34.8. You're going to take them in, you're going to take off the wet clothes, you're going to protect them against heat loss. So obviously you're not going to strip them out in the wind. Wait till you're in a warm place. If you are on the mountain somewhere and somebody has frozen parts, do not thaw them if there's a chance of going back out in the cold to take them back to help.
Oh.
So you don't want to warm them and then freeze them and then warm them again. It's got your symptoms going down. If they have a pulse and breathing, just keep an eye out for what types of things to be watching. Warm fluids. If you're giving IVs to these people, be sure they are warm. If you don't have an IV warmer, you can, especially if you're going in the back country, tuck on a freezing cold bag inside your clothes. So you're warming it as you're going there. The guy we held out all that way, I took my coat off and wrapped it around him, and the whole time he's complaining. You need your coat, you need your coat, you need your coat. Well, at my point in life, when you're slogging across snow and mountain and you're not really used to it, I was plenty warm.
Right.
And finally, when they'd take a break from time to time to switch who was pulling. And I finally went up and stuck my hot little hand on his head and said, on his face, said, do I feel cold to you? Then shut up and keep the coat. Honestly, I am warm. So you can also wrap your tubing through heaters or something. Which reminds me, as we start needing heat in the back of 77 or 293, there's a switch we need to flip.
Oh.
Or we will not be able to have heat.
Mechanic?
No, I know where the switch is,
Okay.
but we have to manually switch it or we're not going to have heat.
Oh,
Okay,
So remind me and I'll show you where that is.
okay. Nicole and I always show up to
We
drive,
started
so
in
one
the
of us
summer,
needs
we
to
had
know.
no air conditioning.
Yeah.
We would have a little air conditioner on the 4th of July. All right.
We did, I bought a little thing. If they do not have a pulse or breathing is absent, do we just call them, declare them dead?
No, warm and dead.
Not dead till they're warm and dead. Now, as I said, that one that died of cardiac arrest was definitely died of cardiac arrest. It was not because of temperature. But I got to ask all kinds of questions. Well, did you do the cornea test? And did you do, what the heck is a cornea test? I never got taught a cornea test. Have you been taught a cornea test?
I've heard about it many times. You told about it.
Open your eyeball and see if it responds. Yeah, I had no idea, but yes, normally you would start CPR first. If they have a shockable rhythm, get them shocked. In treating these patients, the really cold ones, you want to transport them very carefully and cautiously, not a lot of bumpiness or roughness, because and put them into fibrillation. You can tip them over the edge. But go ahead and start CPR if you need to. Put the pads on. See if you need that. Transport them to definitive care. Don't hang out on scene, especially if it's cold. You want to be in where it's warm.
Obvious fatal injury, such as capitation. Then you
Yeah.
don't have to perform them. Good plan.
Injuries incompatible with life. I came across one that wasn't a rollover. And by the time we got there, there were feet sticking out of the window. Looked like they were like face down. And I kept assessing. And from that post, I looked underneath toward the windshield. And it looked like there was somebody through the windshield pointing at me, trying to say help. Well, the feet and the rest of the body belonged to the same person. That was an injury incompatible with life.
Right.
No matter how cold it was, I was not going to save that person.
Yeah.
Yes, decapitation, major things. If they bled out, well, that you may not see in the snow because it won't be bleeding very fast. Try to keep them warm as much as possible. Get the cold stuff off. That applies to the CPR too. Get all the wet stuff off. As you're doing CPR, do you guys know what the H's and T's are? Or differential diagnoses? I don't have them all memorized. So it's like hypo and hypothermia and hypo and hyperglycemia, and it's the things that could be causing what's going on. Hypoxia is one that happens a lot. So as you're trying to resuscitate somebody, always be trying to think, what is going on here that I can revert? Would Narcan help? Would this help? Check the sugars, yes. What can I do that can help fix it? So always keep those in mind when you're going. H's and T's are something they throw out more to the nurses, but so if they're so solidly frozen as to block the airway and chest compression, so you can't do CPR on them because they're solid, you aren't going to be able to save them. I don't know that they did CPR on that guy they found because his heart was still beating, but they did have to heat him up to be able to get him there.
No.
He wasn't dead. No, not that one. There was one in the house here who's he fell and his house was heated by wood stove and he couldn't get up to wooden stove and nobody checked on him. They've been like 3 or 4 days.
And he has a
Something made it so he couldn't get up.
There was this lady in a nursing home who like, she got her house and she like fell. And she laid there for like quite a while, like a few days. And she was like, she broke her hip and her leg, something. But I don't think she was like freezing, but her dog was there.
Well, this one
keeping
was,
her-
yeah, it was because it was a cold
company
snap and he had no heat because he couldn't get to the heat.
Yeah.
And if he had a cell phone, it wasn't with him.
That's why little people could wear the life alert.
Yes,
This
the little
lady
people
didn't
need a
have
life
her-
alert. Okay, so be sure you're dressed appropriately to stay warm. We do have hats, we do have gloves in the ambulance. That doesn't mean count on them because there's not very many of them. They're really to put on the patient.
Right.
EMTs have worn them, however. Okay, heat. When you get into the heat, it usually starts progressively. you start getting like the cramps and exhaustion, or it gets more, you just can't move anymore, you're losing your electrolytes, which is why you need to be drinking electrolytes. I think it's funny, the American Heart people in their first aid DVD tell them, don't drink things like Gatorade because you probably don't need the electrolytes in the sugar. Then they turn around and say, be sure they have electrolytes. And I thought, excess electrolytes will be washed out of your body. That's not a complication. If somebody's about to keel over, I really don't care about the sugar either, unless they're diabetic and are 1,000. I don't care about the sugar either. But it progresses. If it's not stopped at that point, it's going to progress to the next point and the next complication. And eventually they will have heat stroke, which is a true life-threatening emergency because the body can no longer compensate anymore. They have lost the ability to sweat or have sweat out everything they have to sweat out. The organs are starting to get damaged. These are the ones that you want to grab and stick in the crick. Just don't keep them there too long. Pour water on them, or put ice packs around their neck and their groin area, armpits and groin area where you're supposed to put ice packs, or heat packs if you're warming somebody up, the groin and the armpits, because that's where the large blood vessels are going through, and it will warm them up. So why do we always stick them on their cold feet? I don't know. You're supposed to put them there, but we do. This progression can go really, really fast, or it can take a while. When you get into heat exhaustion, they're going to be turning ashen colored, and they're going to have cool, clammy skin, a very dry tongue. Have them stick their tongue out and look at it. You guys know what dry tongues look like. They get white, they get cracky. I always get a kick out of my little old people when I'm trying to decide if they're dehydrated or not and how much fluid to give them. So I'll say, stick your tongue out. And they very delightedly. Thank you. Yeah, the old people, they're fun. Little kids too. And you really need to, yes, keep them, as people live in those hot houses with poor ventilation. These are kiddos who've been locked up in hot cars, or dogs that have been locked up in hot cars. These are, the worst one I found was a guy that was working, kid that was working in the heat at a ranch. And he progressively, I don't feel good today, and he got worse and worse and worse. And when I got there, he was really, really dehydrated. He did have heat stroke. He did have dehydration. He had altitude sickness, and he had gallstones, kidney stones, all in the mix. And when poor kiddo got released from the hospital, he got greeted by a boss that said, "Here's the plane, you're fired." Bless him. Yeah, I wanted to punch that man in the nose. He said, "Oh, he's just a lazy, no good. He hasn't." Well, yeah, he's been going downhill for a week, getting progressively worse, trying to keep working for you. When they are that dehydrated, even in just our little ambulance run from here to Portland, I got 2 liters of saline in this kid. At the hospital, they pumped 3 more liters of saline in this kid. No, he had not. And I went and did the run sheet, came back to get a signature, and he was asleep. And he woke up when I came in, and he says, "Oh, I gotta pee." And I said, "Well, I bet you do." 5 liters of saline, my goodness. Yeah, so you can go ahead and pump in the 2nd and even the 3rd bag of saline. If it's a heat related and they are that dehydrated. I thought Luke was kidding me, but he was dead serious. Because I'd never heard of pumping that much fluid in somebody. He had to bring me a driver. So he dropped me a driver and went back to work.
What is this?
Years ago.
too.
This was before Cody Regional. This was Luke. So for heat cramps, you're going to put like cold packs on the leg. Make sure they're drinking plenty of fluid. The best thing for heat and cold is to prevent it in the first place. Be sure you're dressed appropriately. Be sure you have lots of fluids. Once somebody does have cold injuries, do not give them caffeine. No matter how badly they want it. There was a kid that was lost. Oh, he wasn't a kid. Somebody came and went horn hunting, and they got lost in our canyon. He ended up crossing from one canyon over the top and down into the other canyon, and they couldn't see the storm, and apparently weren't paying any attention to the weather report. The major snowstorm came in, and he spent 2 nights out there trying to stay warm and get found. He could not find where he left his 4-wheeler. When search and rescue finally came and found him, they brought him to us because they had rutted up the road so badly at that point, they didn't want our ambulance even going up the road. So they bring us this guy, and he gets out with a big old cup of coffee and climbs in the back. Bless their hearts, they were trying to warm him up. I said, can I have that? He was just using it to keep his hands warm, basically, is what he said. He said, I don't want that at all. And I said, good. It's gone. I dumped it and we warmed him up. I didn't get after search and rescue for giving him caffeine. I mean, warm's fine. Give him hot chocolate. Give him. It does, but not like coffee does. It's not something you necessarily have on hand either, but so you're going to, with heat exhaustion, you're going to start spraying them with water, dumping water, open up bottles of water and dump on them or whatever it takes. Remember that you can overcool them, and then you're dealing with hypothermia. Kind of like burn patients. You want to stop the burn, but you don't want to overdo it because they have lost their ability to control the heat in their bodies if it's a bad enough burn. Yep. Drowning. Most people do not really drown from their lungs being full of water. They drown because your larynx says, water's coming in. Nope. And it spasms shut. And then they can't breathe. And they suffocate, basically. There are people that get water down in the lungs, but the percentage of them do not have any water in their lungs at all. They call them dry drownings. You can take them then, do CPR, warm them up, get the water out if you can. It's better if they are in clear, clean water because the natural water will just kind of dissipate back out and be gone. If it's something that has any chance of crud in it, they will get infections from it, especially if they aspirated it. And that's how people drown in very little fluid, is because it's just enough to spasm the throat shut. Older people, as we talk about special populations, they lose the ability to maintain their temperatures. Their body can't, it doesn't shiver anymore, and it doesn't, the blood vessels don't dilate and retract like they used to. Diving emergencies, you get the little bubbles in the bloodstream that happen as you come up too fast. And that's why they're supposed to kind of acclimate themselves and come up slower when the divers are who we're talking about here. And I had a training out of Colorado, and they said, yeah, we don't have too many scuba divers here, but they do have an airport. Before people get on an airplane, they say, "Oh, I'm gonna go take one last dive," and they come out and they get on the airplane and they take off. And by the time they're in Denver, they have problems. They have the barotrauma and they have to be taken immediately to, they have a couple decompression chambers there. If we used to try to help them. But they have really pain, a lot of pain in their joints and muscles. They'll usually have like 100% oxygen going on. You can have problems with sinuses when they come up. You can get ear infections. I had a nephew that would get ear infections every time he went swimming, and he belonged to a swim coach dad. So they had to put drops in his ears all the time to dry him out so he didn't get injuries. You can actually burst a lung if the expansion of gas in the closed space gets too big. You can get belly pain. Your decompression sickness, they'll stagger. They complain of joint pain. If any of you have ever had laparoscopic surgery, where they go in and they fill your air up with in your belly so they can look, how did you feel the next morning? What hurt? Did your shoulders hurt?
Yes.
Your shoulder, you feel like they did this and hung you from the ceiling because it's the air escaping out. Magnify that times a whole bunch, you can maybe relate to people with events. It just really hurts bad until that air gets out. They can actually get some paralyzation going on. The bladder won't function properly. So they have the hyperbaric chambers that they put them in and increase the. All we can do is get IV fluids going and get them to Portland, who then sends them out somewhere else. The deeper you go, yep, injuries at depth. They can have injuries from hitting things. Around here, we get more our diving injuries. If people dove in and they're unconscious when they surface, be super cautious of that C-spine because they probably broke their neck. They also get air emboli. Anytime you get playing with air, you can have a little bit get out in the bloodstream, and it will cause problems with like PEs and such. If we need to rescue somebody from the water, we are not jumping in and swimming over to get them. You can throw them something, hopefully have a rope attached to it, so you can come back. You can reach out with something. If somebody happens to have a boat, you can row out and get them. But very last resort, this is a good idea. You could swim out, have a towel or something for them to hang on to, keeping them at a distance from you, and tow them back in. Yep, they will pull you under. They are panicked.
Punch them real hard, so you knock them out, and then you grab them and drag them short.
Okay,
Hey,
not in the book.
Angie's telling us if they start pulling us down, smack them and knock them out and then pull them to shore. If people are in water and you suspect a spinal injury, how do you backboard them? This is really cool. You take the board, you keep them in the water, float the board underneath and bring them up, strap them to it, take them out. Cool. That's way cool. And before you jump into the water to rescue this person, be sure you don't have pagers, cell phones, and other electronics on your person. Just a thought. Because anything that can't get wet, don't take it in with you. Most water rescue, we're going to be calling search and rescue and let them come get them. But if you happen to be there and need to take action, that's what you do. Our search and rescue, no offense, I would rather work with Bighorn Search and Rescue or Johnson County than ours. That night that we hiked 2 hours in to haul that guy out from his cross-country skiing accident, we paged search and rescue. Search and rescue as we were leaving town. They showed up when we were about 100 feet away from the parking lot. Which is why I don't like to rely on our search and rescue. Then they came charging out to try to take the patient away, and my two young EMTs blasted right by. You're not getting the glory now, forget it.
We're here.
And they just go on by, and I thought, well, okay. If they've been in the water, well, any of these guys, be sure and do a good history taking, especially the people who have been diving. Heat stroke, ask them about exertion, how much, they were exerting, what were you doing? Were you playing football at the time? You don't hear about them as often, but you used to hear about every fall when football season would start, there would be a couple of people die across the country because the coaches were working them and not giving them water. When you get all these drills done, you can have a drink. You got to do this first. Well, you can't use it as a reward. You need to keep them hydrated. Maybe. Hard to say what's in there. I know we have ropes and 7-7 has ropes.
Yeah. What?
They teach you that in Boy Scouts.
There you go.
And you fill them with air. Fill them with air. You tie a knot in the end of each leg, and then you use the waistband and like this.
Uh-huh.
To fill them with air and use it as a flotation
And then
device.
just like tied option or.
Just hold it. They just, and it's your arms in it.
So you might can do that with my cover also during the ambulance. Make a flotation device to send to them. Okay, altitude sickness. What kind of symptoms do you expect with altitude sickness?
Dizziness.
Dizziness, difficulty breathing. You can actually have pink frothy stuff.
Throwing up.
They can get really dizzy. They can be vomiting. They can actually go unconscious. My mom had a hole in her septum of her heart, and she could not go over 6,000 feet, and even driving over this pass would get her. But a guy from the state used to love to talk about a run that we had here because he just happened to be here. He got in on it. A lady fell down the stairs at the store into the basement, and that's what we were called for. But progressively, she couldn't breathe, and she started coughing up frothy stuff, and it turned out to be altitude sickness. So if you're in this area, ask them, especially they're usually people that are coming through, where did you come from?
The COPD guy, and we didn't realize he came from Minnesota until we got him to the hospital, and we're like, where are you from? He's like, Minnesota. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like,
Now we know why you can't breathe. Well, we talked to him about that. He said,
Yeah.
well, I may not be able to come this way anymore because, yeah, it's the altitude. Mhm. The kid, I was surprised because the altitude was still, I suspected altitude because of his symptoms. That kid I said was working on the ranch and way dehydrated. But I asked him where he was from. And where he was from is Mississippi, I think. But he was like 100 feet below sea level is where he came from. So he had a great altitude change. And he had been here for a week, so I would have thought that would have gone away, but it just seemed to worsen instead of going away. So in quizzing him about what was going on, it had progressed and gotten worse and worse and worse. And the only reason he called the ambulance was because he kept talking to his mom about it, and he had been drinking water and tea and such, because his mom said, you get busy drinking stuff, that he'd been really dizzy and it just progressively got worse. So mom said, call the ambulance. So yes, when ambulance showed up and got lost, and finally the owner had to lead us to the kid, he was madder than a hornet that the kid called the ambulance. I thought, are you kidding me? I'm not working for you ever. So altitude, yes, what'll happen is the heart isn't able to function like it should, so the fluid backs up into the lungs and you get lungs full of fluid. They can't breathe, they get the frothy pink stuff, are short of breath. Extreme fatigue, you lose your muscle coordination, you can have a horrible headache. And best thing you can do for them while you treat the symptoms, you try to get IVs flowing, get them off the mountain, take them down. We had somebody that called one time with terrible sickness and couldn't breathe, and they took themselves down the other side of the mountain and symptoms went away, so they never went to the doctor. Because we were checking with hospitals trying to hunt this guy down. Lightning strike. This is one of those cool injuries I'm talking about. 3417. This is there's a definite name for it, Licton something or another. But this is a type of a burn from a lightning injury. That neat feather pattern is going to be with them for the rest of their life. It doesn't go away. They say 49 people a year in the United States die from lightning. I have known one of them.
Yeah.
Nope. She was on the USA track team and would have been in the 1980 Olympics that they didn't go to. But she was water skiing and was just had the ski up and was rinsing the lake water off, and lightning hit and went in and went out. Her sister was a nurse and could not revive her. She was gone. So I was very paranoid of lightning for a lot of years. Still somewhat, but not as much as I was. The thing about lightning, you're talking massive voltage. You don't know what damage it did inside. So people who have been struck by lightning should go down to Greeley to the burn center. Most people I know that have been hit by lightning, by the time they come to, they just kind of resume their normal activities and they don't even go to medical care. I had a guy who was logging on us on our mountain and got hit by lightning. I found out about it a week or so after it happened. I talked to him, it's about a month after when I saw him. I said, well, what happened? He says, well, I was knocked out. He figures for an hour, he could tell time by the sun. So he said, I was out for about an hour. I said, what happened when you came to? Still had some hours of daylight. I grabbed my saw and went back to work. It's just him and his dog. Keep this in mind, behind a lock gate on private property. Then my next question, have you had any persistent symptoms? Yeah, my arm's kind of numb and tingly, and it has been the whole time. A month later, his arm is still numb and tingly. And you picked up a chainsaw and went to work. Oh, probably wasn't the smartest, was it? No, do not pick up a chainsaw and go back to work. A lot of people I know needed somebody close by, came and opened their airway, and they started breathing again. Some of them do on their own. They can do things like rupture their eardrums, get damage in there. Some people's clothes are blown off from the force of the lightning going through. You can get muscle damage. You get a release of myoglobin from the injured muscle, which messes up the kidneys. You can get all kinds of problems. But of course, we're tough here. We don't go to the doctor. It says even permanent paralysis and quadriplegia have been reported in a few cases. And they can go into a secondary cardiac arrest if they don't get treated. So if you find someone who's been hit by lightning, try to get them to go get checked out. If you are outside and you don't want to get hit by lightning, try to not be standing by the tallest object. That is a good conductor. Don't stand. Don't be in it. Don't be the tallest yourself. Get down so you're not the tallest. Don't hide under one. If you have a structure, substantial structure, get in it. Avoid touching anything that is a good conductor. There's a person that was in probably my first AEMT class, told us how he got hit by lightning. He was actually in a barn type thing with had a weather vane on top, and he was working on his car. I guess it was a garage. Lightning hit the top, came down, came through the car, through the tool, through him, and out the drain pipe, which he happened to be laying on. So he has a lovely scar of the drain pipe on his behind from getting hit by lightning. Of course, he says, "You want to see it?" No, we're good. Thanks, thanks.
I was like, I want to see.
We're fine. No, we're okay. So try to stay out of it. Just like the lightning, if in an accident scene, if it's not safe because there's wire pinging around on the ground, be aware that wet ground will take that electricity and carry it further. There was a fireman that tried to sneak up around it because they were called to the fire. So he went around the field and was coming up from the field side rather than the wire side. And he got blown clear off his feet, and his turnout gear underneath the jumpsuit he had on the bottom had huge holes burned in it and lots of things.
It was the dad that his son got in a car accident. He like went to the electric pole and he ran out there.
Yeah, the power line was on the car.
Yeah.
And he grabbed it. Okay. Rest of environmental stuff or bites. Spider bites. Black widow spiders can cause stomach problems, intestinal problems, and muscle pains, muscle spasms. Usually one spider is not going to kill you, but a lot of them will.
Yeah.
So be careful of them. Biggest one I've seen was his body was about that big. If we what?
That brown recluse spider.
Brown recluse aren't supposed to be here, but they come here. They travel.
Most, that's because the answer is yes,
But they're
Okay.
But they come in suitcases and other things when people come. Cars and packages
and I
and
think they're also some spiders with the
yeah.
thing on their stomach.
The
Yeah,
thing
we
about
have
the
one
brown
in Denver,
recluse,
but they did bring the spider in, so it's possible.
the thing about the brown recluse spider, it eats tissue and causes tissue necrosis. They call the fiddleback, if you look at the pictures, they're kind of on its head. It looks like there's a little violin laying on top of its head and back. Right there.
Oh.
So if the picture of the spider bite here, if it starts eating away, get to a doctor because they need to cut all that out or it's going to continue to eat and it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. So get it dealt with. Snakes. Pretty much the rattlesnakes are the ones we have here. People get bit by other snakes. The bull snakes and such will still bite. They still hurt like heck. They don't start swelling necessarily. But the rattlesnake, when they bite, they may not put venom in you. The younger ones can't control how much venom they give you yet. So they are more deadly because you get venom every time. The hospital does have antivenom. You need to let them know right away that that's what you're bringing in, because it takes 30 minutes to prepare the antivenom to be ready to give it. If you have a heads up, they can give it to them as soon as they come in the door. So be sure and give them a heads up.
Then ours just.
That's in there, so.
Our little snake bite just flew out, right? From a snake bite.
You're talking the little one?
Mm-hmm.
Probably. I don't know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Last summer, there was 5-year-old kid got bit, and Cody, and we ended up bringing in a woman from down here and hauling butt for Cody, because they needed more doses. That stuff's like $20,000 a vial, and
Yeah, it's very expensive.
Full dose is like $100,000.
There was a girl in Casper who was not alcohol, but she was little. She was like 5 or 6 and got bit by a baby rattlesnake. They flew her from just straight from October to
Yeah, I couldn't talk about ours because it wasn't ours.
Save the time.
Really?
Interestingly enough, you know how we have our list of meds that we're authorized to carry? You can get special permission. There were people that were working out in this area. I think it was a recovery operation or something that was going on at the time, and there were rattlesnakes everywhere. They actually sent this stuff out with the EMTs after a quick training session. And they had it on hand to help these people on scene. If it got worse, if they got bit. So, coral snakes are usually down like the southern, aren't they, with the wet stuff where there's more water. Deep south.
So what is it? Red on yellow, you're a dead fellow, red on black. you're
I
a
don't
big
remember.
jack. You've never heard that?
Yeah, because there's a coral snake and a tree snake, they're very similar.
Red on yellow, you're a dead fellow, red on black, you're okay, Jack.
Yeah, see, this one has the yellow stripes.
Oh, yeah, red and on yellow.
That's
Yep.
when you have the yellows.
They're dead. They're dead fellow.
Way back when I first became an EMT, they said, if possible, grab the snake and bring it with you. I guarantee you, ER will kick you out if you show up with a snake.
You better be dead.
I was gonna say.
Actually, someone brought a snake.
Picture's fine.
The lid on it like that. And the nurse just had a fit. She had somebody take it outside. She couldn't even touch the top. And I thought, it's a itty bitty garter snake.
My husband would do that.
But some people are that way. About all we can do with them is try to keep them calm. Call ahead, handle them somewhat carefully. You don't want to, don't make them walk and that sort of thing. You can take a marker and make a trace around the swelling area so that they know, and write the time so they know how fast it's progressing. What was that?
It says if possible, take the snake with you to the hospital.
Yeah.
In a jar.
Don't take the snake. Take a picture. You have cameras.
Oh, we know. We knew what it said.
Where did it say that? Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Right there. It's got it down in the bottom. Take a picture. Don't take the snake. I always thought it was weird. Never mind. We'll be here forever. Scorpion stings are usually more painful than dangerous. The ones we have here are about yay big. And they're white. And they say they feel like yellow jacket stings, hornet stings, like little metal slivers or something. They hurt. A bunch of them can probably make you sick. Terrell was very disappointed in me. We were digging under rocks and they turned the rock over and said, "Ooh, a scorpion." And they said, "Oh, it's a big one." And I said, Where? That's big. And he was bummed, but down around New Mexico and Arizona, they come bigger. Those ones you do not want to play with, they can kill you. Same with the rattlesnakes. Our snakes are a whole lot bigger. They were like the size of my arm, around and 6 feet long. There are a few of them in Wyoming also. They have been seen, the big ones have been seen up on orchards, so it's possible they can be here. Tick bites. Mostly you want to get the tick off. You do not, don't use your ideas of like burn matches and Vaseline, and there's all kinds of things I've heard. They say that can cause it to burrow in further rather than coming out. So you're supposed to just grab it and pull it till it tents the skin like this and hope it lets go. I don't know what to do if it doesn't. Take the tick with you if you take them to the hospital. There are weird diseases you can get, and picture 3428, you see that little target type rash, bullseye pattern, is Lyme disease, does come from ticks. Doesn't talk about it, but here in this area, we do have bubonic plague. Used to be called Black Death during the Middle Ages. It is carried by fleas. And so people like trappers and people who mess with dead animals, furry animals. Nicole, I don't know, I've never heard about hunters having any problems. But my neighbor did get it, and he didn't, his wasn't the plague part, but his, your lymph nodes swell up huge. The lymph node in his armpit, they said, was about the size of a baseball. So there's a lot of pain. It swelled up really huge. He had a girlfriend who was a nurse from California and wanted to immediately fly him to California to good care. He ended up in Casper, who said, this is what you got, and took care of it. So sometimes bigger isn't always better. Marine animals, we don't deal with too many marine animals. But if you are hanging out at the beach and you come across one, you're going to wipe it off. You're going to put baking soda and water or vinegar on it to get it to stop. And then you're going to put them in a hot shower, really hot shower for like 20 minutes or until the pain goes away, as hot as they can take. Hot water. Yes, in the survival show, they peed on it. Okay, any questions? Oh, animal bites of any kind you want to get washed off. Keep it clean as you can. If you bring, or if somebody shows up at the ER with a dog bite, they do need to check the dog. Hopefully it's got rabies current vaccination. If not, they will quarantine the dog and they will start rabies treatment on the person. If you, really thick gooey shots, I hear they're very painful.
Yeah, Becky.
Yes.
I have a question for one of your students that she said vet technician. Yeah. Can you ask her if it's, I've been giving my dog the rattlesnake vaccine. Is it really worth it?
It's not proven to be worth it.
Really?
So, but they, you know, it's the same idea like any of the vaccines. They're just giving a little bit of the poison, you know, to see, but they haven't done enough studies on it, honestly, but I do it.
So I've been doing that with my little dog that is only 20 pounds, but even if I bring him to the vet really quick here to Thermopolis, can the vet do anything for him?
We have anti-venom at our vet.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, so I'm sure they probably do, because it's a lot less of, it's, you know, it used to be like $10,000 for vets, and now it's around, we can do the treatment for about $1,500. So still extremely a lot, but
okay,
way
thank
more
you.
affordable in dogs. No, we won't.
Thanks.
I was just saying. We can stop by and get them started and then take them on the road. So, any questions on environmental or, oh, people bites? People bites count. People have a lot of nasty germs in their mouth. So wash them, clean them up good best you can, and get them checked out. Any other questions? If not, we will see you Tuesday.
Have a good night.
Monday. It's been a long day already.
Monday. Thank you. Thanks,
Have a
Becky.
good day.
Thanks,
Have a good
guys.
day. Bye-bye.
Monday.
You know,
And
I thought that
Thursday.
was- so this is why I read the